All right, thanks everybody for coming. I know the master students can't come today because they're doing their TV news days, so Aisling is going to put it up on YouTube. So I'm delighted to welcome the Irish Examiner's senior news reporter Conall Fatharta here today to talk to you about his groundbreaking reporting on illegal adoptions and deaths in mother and baby homes. He's a very experienced investigative reporter who's worked with the Irish Examiner for the last 11 years. During that time, he's done a lot of investigative reporting that exposed stories about illegal adoptions, deaths in mother and baby homes, the Magdalene laundries, and vaccinations on young children. One of the good stories he wrote in that time as well was about the Bessborough Mothers and Baby Home in Cork, where he discovered that there were 470 deaths of babies between 1934 and 54. He revealed how some of the birth certs in mother and baby homes were falsified and babies were sold to families abroad illegally. He's going to talk to you today about how he managed to confirm these stories, focusing in particular on the hurdles he had to overcome to get documentary evidence under FOI from state agencies. He'll also focus on how he managed to get sources, who were often very reluctant to speak to him initially, to talk to him on the record or provide him with other sources who would speak on the record. I know this particular advice is very timely for all of you who are currently researching and writing up your final year projects. One of the big problems I know that a lot of you have is trying to get responses to FOI requests and to secure documentary evidence for your stories, as well as trying to convince reluctant sources to talk to you on the record. So please give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hi. So I suppose I'll probably just give you a little bit of background to myself and kind of how I got into the job. And like Mary said, I'm a daily news reporter, but I suppose I'm probably more known for this kind of stuff that I write about, which is largely investigative, which is kind of what I would prefer to do all the time if possible. But the financial needs of all newspapers mean you have to kind of spread yourself as far and wide as possible. So I have to look at what year I actually started working. I started working as a reporter in 2008. I went to university in Galway. I did a degree in history and sociology and politics, and I was destined to kind of do a PhD in history and kind of carry on in the academic sphere. But I suppose I always wanted to be a reporter from a fairly young age. I wanted to get into journalism. So once I kind of got that chance, I jumped at it and I did a master's in journalism, and I started with a regional newspaper in Cavan and Monaghan of all places. And then I basically got my foot in the door in the Examiner and was full-time in the Examiner from about the age of 26. And I'm there ever since, for better or for worse. So I suppose I'll tell you kind of how I got into writing about this type of thing, and I think there's some lessons in it for maybe general journalism in terms of how you do things and why you kind of pursue certain stories. I suppose I can't. Did I use the title, "The Story That Keeps On Breaking"? Is that the word?
You did. The story that keeps on breaking. Yeah.
I suppose there's a theme through a lot of what I do, and I suppose it's a theme for journalism about kind of human rights issues. Is that you kind of have to keep plugging away at them and keep writing about them, even if they don't make any difference at the time. So I mean, the Tuam Mother and Baby Home you're all aware of, and that was a big story in 2014. I've been writing about
Conall,
these
you
issues.
might just explain to them what that story is about. There's a lot of people who aren't.
Oh yeah, fair enough.
So they don't know what it is.
Yeah, in Tuam there's a mother and baby homes institutions which I write a lot about, which were basically places where unmarried single women went who were pregnant and were essentially incarcerated and hidden away so they could have their children in secrecy and their children taken for adoption. I primarily write a lot about adoption and illegal adoption and forced adoption, but part of that story is children who passed away and died in these institutions. And in Tuam, 796 children died and were presumed buried in essentially a mass grave, which was the site of a septic tank. When the story broke in 2014, it went all around the world. It was a huge story, not just nationally but internationally. There's now a state inquiry into infant mortality rates in these institutions. I suppose the point I was making is I've been writing about forced and illegal adoption since about 2010. So once my first story on all of this was a story about a woman called Tressa Reeves, who was an English woman born to Irish parents, and in 1961 she fell pregnant and was sent by her parents to Ireland to have the child in a kind of, they're termed nursing homes, or kind of privately run, essentially private accommodation that you would pay, or your parents would pay, to house you in while you were pregnant. And then her child was taken from her, and his adoption was arranged illegally. Essentially that was done by the St. Patrick's Guild Adoption Agency facilitating the illegal birth registration of her child's birth. So that would be that his birth was registered in the name of the adoptive parents, even though he was never legally adopted. He was simply given to a couple and they were told, register this child as if it was born to you. Therefore his birth was falsified, his identity was falsified, and her son would have been raised believing that the people he thought were his parents were his natural parents, when in fact they're not. I stumbled onto that story. I had no interest in adoption. I had no interest in women's rights, or women's, well I did, but I should term that in a better way. But I mean, I wasn't driven by writing about the history of women. I did a degree in history. I had no interest in women's history. I was literally reading reports on the Oireachtas. I had written some stories about waiting times for adoptive parents who were looking to adopt internationally, and during that research I was reading old Oireachtas debates, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. And I was going back over them, and I came across a woman called Susan Lohan from the Adoption Rights Alliance, who was talking during a Oireachtas committee hearing, and she started mentioning, you know, we're bringing in legislation here, but no one has dealt with our history, or our history of illegal adoptions. So I mean, like any reporter, I thought, what are illegal adoptions? I didn't know anything about them. So I rang her up and she said, you're the first reporter to have called me in about 10 years. So I said, I mean, I was again 25, 26. So I took a punt and said, well, do you want to meet up with me and we can have a chat about it? She was probably quite sceptical because I was young. So I met her in Dublin, and I bumped into another woman who was a friend of hers who told me about Tressa Reeves. And I couldn't believe that this could happen, that someone could have their child taken from him and essentially his identity taken from him and removed. So I started talking to this woman. I said if Tressa would like to talk to me, I'd love to do a story on her. And she did. So she contacted Tressa. I flew to England. I interviewed Tressa for about 2 days. And I wrote the story. And it was a pretty big story at the time. St. Patrick's Guild will become important because 10 years later, last May, the minister announced that, to much kind of fanfare, that we have now uncovered a new scandal around illegal birth registrations that were discovered in St. Patrick's Guild records. At that point, I'd been writing about them for 9 years, consistently and specifically about their involvement in illegal birth registrations. So I suppose the point being, sometimes when you write something, nobody hears it and nobody sees it, and then when it does become a story, all of a sudden you have a lot to work back on and point out to relevant authorities that, well, this didn't just happen overnight. So I suppose the background to Tressa is important because she kind of started me on this journey, as it were, and I think a lot of what stemmed from her story is stuff that we're now dealing with as a country. I mean, there's a scoping exercise into illegal adoptions now. I mean, there's a whole range of reasons why that's being done wrong, but anyway, I think the lesson from that was, and I probably, if I was writing the story now, I'd have written it entirely differently, because from the day I published the story on Tressa, I kind of knew I'd be writing about this subject for the rest of my journalistic career, because I just felt she was one of many, and I couldn't believe that this could happen to basically an entire cohort of people, simply because they were women and simply because they were unmarried. Tressa had spent years trying to find her son where he was. She had actually baptised him in the name Andre, which in 1961 would have been a pretty unusual name in Ireland. And the only reason she did that was because she thought if I ever went looking for him,
he'd be baptized, he'd be registered in that name, and I'd be able to find him. But of course, that was taken away from him because the birth was falsified. In the end, I mean, God knows how many stories I've written about Tressa, but I mean, last summer there was a major case taken by Tressa against the state and St. Patrick's Guild, which she won, which was a landmark case taken by a natural mother. And funnily enough, I mean, her son was 51 when he found out who he was and what happened to him.
So how did she find him?
She essentially basically contacted, I mean, in the context of what we know about illegal registrations now, the minister announced last May that St. Patrick's Guild had found 126 cases of this type of thing in their records.
Right.
And this was a big story. And I'll get to that at the end, but I mean, I've been writing about it for years. I mean, beyond me that we could say that this was a big story now. She essentially had written to 3 ministers individually. The state has actually said since May, you know, we have a duty to inform people where we know that this happened. That is the only thing Tressa ever asked for. She only ever asked that her son be informed the truth, and this was consistently denied to her. She settled the case, but it was a big story last summer.
I remember it, and they said they were going to write to all those people.
Say,
that was a huge story.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the point I'm making in terms of sometimes when you come onto a story. I mean, I've been writing about illegal registrations for years, and I mean, nobody was paying any attention to them. But then, when it does happen, you have a whole body of work to go back on that you can point out to. And I mean, I'll get to it, but I mean. The state largely said in May that this is the first time we've ever come across evidence of this. I mean, it's just categorically untrue. And I mean, I could point to 3 or 4 key pieces of documentation that I had uncovered over the years, which I could then put together in a large piece saying, in fact, this is what the state knew. And I mean, I'll get to that. I have a big thing about narrative, and I think I'm just prefacing everything with Tressa. I think something starts you on your journey, and for her, for me, that was her. So I owe her a lot. You know, she's kind of, as I say to every time I do one of these talks, I'm an obsessive type of personality in the sense of once I get into something, I really get into it, and I think it's a good trait in journalists. I think your editors might argue that it's not, because you kind of obsess about this subject, which I do, and they're going, have you got anything else on something else? And I go, not really. But you know, I think it's a good trait to have, that to be a dog with a bone, and to be curious, and to not accept, don't accept the narrative that you're given on a story, which is exactly what I did with this illegal registrations, because I knew that narrative was incorrect. But I mean, oftentimes the media are fed a line at a press conference by a minister or by a politician or whatever, and you're told, we found all of this happened now, and aren't we great for revealing it? But I think journalists should always question that. I mean, you should always question why you're being told something, particularly by someone in authority or particularly by a politician. There's a reason usually why you're being given a piece of information.
Or a spin or a line.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so things like that annoy me. That's probably why I don't tend to write. Why I like this kind of investigative stuff. But the point I make about Tress is I wrote the story as almost like a human interest story, and I would not write the story like that now. I think what I've tried to do since was place everyone that I write about in the context of a system, and that this was a system. Whether you talk about mother and baby homes or Magdalen laundries or industrial schools or any of the kind of scandals that Ireland has seen over the last 20 years, I mean, the thing that links them all is that they affected women, vulnerable women of a certain class, or basically because they were single and had the temerity to have sex outside of wedlock, and their children. Whereas in Ireland we like to focus on these things as individual scandals, whereas in fact they're all linked. And I think they tell us a lot about the fundamental character of the Irish state from its foundation, essentially, in terms of how it treated a cohort of people.
And the big influence the Catholic Church had.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I don't look at this mother and baby homes inquiry as any different to the Magdalen laundries inquiry, which I was writing about before that, because I think they're fundamentally the same point, the same issue. But I think we're always given a narrative, and that is the narrative that we dealt with the Magdalen laundries. Here's an apology. and there's nothing else to see. And I mean, now we have mother and baby homes, and we look at them like they're entirely different. Now that we found the St. Patrick's Guild illegal registrations, we're now looking at them
like they're separate to the mother and baby homes, when in fact they're one and the same. But when you see things in isolation, it doesn't look as bad as when you see things in the main. So I suppose I'll make a couple of points about narrative, and particularly about the Tuam story, because it was a huge story. I mean, some people in the room will be aware, some of you won't, but I mean, there are stories that are nationally very big in Ireland, and there are a handful of stories that become internationally big. The Tuam one was one. I mean, it was all over the world when it broke, because of the research of Catherine Corliss, who pulled the death certs of all of these children, and the fact that they had been dumped in a mass grave. I mean, the fact that children had died in these institutions was known, it wasn't new, but I think the fact that it was the manner in which they were buried, and I use the term buried very loosely, seemed to catch public attention, and particularly when it was the Daily Mail broke the story, and once they put it on the Daily Mail's website, I mean, it's a hugely read news website, it just went around the world. But again, the aftermath of these things particularly interested me, because I mean, I knew we'd be looking at adoption then, we'd be looking at these institutions in depth, and I suppose the narrative has always been, we didn't know anything about this until 2012, until 2014, when Captain Cordis's work made the news. And that's not to denigrate the amazing, and I know Catherine well, the amazing work she's done. I mean, we wouldn't have a state inquiry without her. But I'm always wary of politicians that stand up and present these kind of narratives, like, you know, there's a lot of hand-wringing in the Dáil, and these were darker times, and we didn't know God. Now that we know, we'll do something about it. So I mean, as soon as I hear things like that, I start to go, there must be something else there. So I mean, that's the kind of key thing on narratives for me, is always question them. I mean, you could be wrong. It could well be the correct narrative, but I'm always suspicious of them. So I mean, I had known that they were looking at, I had written a lot on the Magdalen laundries, which had been investigated in 2012 by the then Senator Martin McAleese. And I had known that they were, as part of that process, they would have been examining mother and baby homes, because women went from mother and baby homes to Magdalen laundries. I mean, there were exit pathways from that. So I mean, I had an idea that something had to have been known about mother and baby homes and adoption. Infant mortality before that. But again, it's a matter of getting your hands on it. So I mean, I began the process of trying to see what was known by the state before Catherine Cordis's revelations. And I came across, when I say came across, I was given, I was leaked, which I know looks very boring, but it was actually kind of really important in terms of changing the narrative about what we knew about what was essentially a national scandal. So I mean, this is from 2000. The date is important, first of all. So it's October 2012. So that's 2 years before anyone knew anything about the Tuam, and before it popped up in the news. So at this time, the state was examining the Magdalen laundries, and like I said, as part of that process, I subsequently learned that they were also looking at 2 mother and baby homes, one being Tuam and one being the Bessborough Mother and Baby Home in Cork. So I mean, Tuam was clearly on the radar in 2012, but I mean, just how much it was on the radar is pretty shocking. So I mean, if you read down through it, this is a meeting of teleconference between Davida Della Harpy and Phil Garland. These were senior managements within the HSE at the time. Phil Garland was the assistant.
For the people not from Ireland, this was from the Health Service Executive. They're the agency that
so they'd be the agency that
are responsible. Yeah,
they hold a lot of the records for mother and baby homes. They're now held by TUSLA, which is a child and family agency, but at the time it was the HSE. The HSE was basically examining its own records to determine state involvement with the Magdalen laundries, which, by the way, was denied by the Irish government for years and years and years and years. And now we know, of course, they were routinely involved in the laundries. But anyway, again, everything in Ireland takes a long time to get anywhere. So this is while they were looking at the Magdalen laundries, they had stumbled across an archive of material in relation to the Tuam Mother and Baby Home. And I mean, this isn't material you were going to get under FOI. It's pretty obvious when you read it why. But the language in it is pretty striking. So I mean, the date's important, 2 years before Tuam. The people involved are important because they're senior management. Like Phil Garland was the Assistant National Director for Child and Family Services, I believe. I think he was coordinating the look back into records. So I mean, I don't know if everyone can see it, but there's a reference to basically a childcare manager had come across an archive of material related to the Tuam Mother and Baby Home. And they uncovered a large archive of photographs, documentation, correspondence relating for children sent for adoption to the US. There was also documentation in relation to discharges and admissions to psychiatric institutions in the Western area. Again, that jumps out at you. They found lots of stuff. One thing is clear, however, is that more than one letter to a parent or parents asking for money for an infant that has been discharged or died. So again, children or parents of children are being asked for money even in the cases where the child has died, so they haven't even informed them. So I mean, I'm reading this thinking, wow, this is all really interesting. They compiled a list of 1,000 names, and it wasn't sure whether these were to do with relate to the ongoing examination of the Magdalene system or whether they relate to the adoption of children by parents possibly in the USA. It was agreed that I would draft an early warning 1 to 2 pager for Philip Crowley, again another senior person in the organisation, suggesting that this goes all the way up to the minister. So basically to the highest levels, the Minister for Health. This may prove to be a scandal that dwarfs other more recent issues with the Church and State because of the very emotive sensitivities around adoption of babies with or without the will of the mother. A concern is that if there is evidence of trafficking babies, it must have been facilitated by doctors, social workers, etc. And a number of these health professionals may still be working in the system. It is important to send this up to the Minister as soon as possible with a view to an interdepartmental committee and a fully fledged, fully resourced forensic investigation and state inquiry. So senior management within the HSE was saying we need a state inquiry into what we found in relation to the Tuam Mother and Baby Home 2 years before Captain Corliss's work revealed. And I mean, further documents I got revealed other concerns about Tuam more specifically about infant mortality, that they had a large amount of dead children basically on records, and that there was concerns that this was so big that we have to basically create a separate inquiry to this. Now, in tandem with that document, there was a report prepared into Bessborough, and a 20-page report was written on Bessborough which raised the exact same concerns that were essentially being flagged in relation to Tuam. That large numbers of children died there. I think the term shocking rates of infant mortality was used, that were, quote, a cause for serious consternation. There was concerns raised about the financial running of the place, how adoptive parents were assessed for adoption, but the long and the short of it was infant mortality was front and centre in the concerns about Bessborough. So you have two institutions which they have their archive about. So this is material coming directly from the records of the institution. And that HSE management, who were looking at Magdalene laundries primarily, were so concerned about what they were finding in relation to mother and baby homes that senior management said we need to put this to the minister because this needs to be a state inquiry in and of itself. And you can guess what happened? Nothing. This didn't go, as far as I'm aware, none of this went to the minister. The report into Bessborough, which I wrote about, didn't go on. Well, I was told at the time I wrote the story that this never went to any government department. Subsequently, they said it went to 2 government departments. But again, nothing happened. But I mean, that story, I ran a 2-page series on this, which was essentially what the state knew about infant deaths in these institutions, which was a hell of a lot. And again, it was about entirely changing the narrative of what we knew about these places. So the government could always turn around and say, well, we launched an inquiry because Captain Corliss did this great work and we didn't know anything. But when you write this, you say, well, in fact, you did know. You knew 2 years earlier, you knew, and you did it. Nothing was done because nobody bothered to do anything about it. You basically put that line back in its place, and you change how we understand state knowledge and kind of the knowledge of authorities about events before the time, because the important thing, I mean, I actually quoted in a piece recently, Catherine's appointment when she wrote to the Pope, she highlighted that Tuam became a public scandal in 2014. And I thought the choice of language was interesting because it became a public scandal in 2014, but it was very much a scandal in 2012. It was just that we didn't know about it. So I mean, issues like that are why narrative is important, and I think the role of a good journalist is to question narrative, and when you can, and when you get, I mean, not, to be honest, I mean, you couldn't have, I mean, in terms of strong lines, I mean, that was full of them. I mean, this could be a scandal that dwarfs recent more scandals, this needs to go to the minister, there needs to be a full state inquiry. I mean, I had any number of lines I could pull from that for a front page story. But I think it was a crucially important, when anything is written about this scandal, I think that's a crucially important piece of paper, because I think it shows that we sit on material in Ireland until it is forced out, and what Captain Corliss did was force it out, because you couldn't deny what she had learned. Because exactly what happened here was that we essentially, this was passed on. It didn't appear in the McAleese report because the McAleese basically said, the McAleese report was outside of our terms of reference, and essentially the HSE said, we look at this separately, and it was just left sit there.
You haven't any idea who leaked that document to you? I'm not asking you to give me the name. Yeah.
Oh, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you get it by post or by email?
I got it by email actually. Yeah.
By email. All right.
Yeah. Would you believe I was actually on a stag do in Amsterdam when I got it?
Right.
Which is true. Yeah. I was in a bar when I got it, and I was reading it, and all of my friends were going, "Jesus, what's he doing?"
Yeah.
But I mean, I knew as soon. I mean, there was a lot in it. You know, and you know, not everything you get is dynamite, and I've kind of picked out the ones that, I mean, once you read that piece of paper, you know you have a big story, simply because of the date.
But the reason whoever leaked it to you because they knew you'd been writing about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So they wanted it out. They wanted it out, didn't they?
And I mean, they had the same attitude that I had. That there was an annoyance probably that the narrative was that we didn't know anything and we didn't do anything, whereas it's clear that some people were very concerned. I mean, and I had subsequent material to this, which is all about Tuam and all about Bessborough, and it is all about concerns about the level of infant death there. Now, it's not about where those children were buried, but the point is, it's clear from what they were looking at in relation to the Magdalen laundries that they were more worried about this, they were thinking this is potentially bigger.
Bigger, yeah.
And I don't think anything, I mean, only for Captain Corliss, this would probably be sitting somewhere in the Department of Health and no one would know about it. So I mean, again, anyone that knows me, I bang on about kind of narrative a lot, because I think it's important.
But you know what's interesting about that too, just from your point of view, whoever leaked that to Conall must have where they worked, but they obviously were people who were high enough up who saw that email, but they didn't like the way things were happening. So it was someone from the inside. Would I be fair enough in saying that? With that, I'm just thinking in general terms.
That's been recorded.
No, well, it would be somebody. It was someone who had access to it. I'll put it to it that
someone
way.
Who had access to it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So what I'm just trying to point out to you is, sometimes there are people, we might be cynical about institutions and people working for the state, but sometimes you do find people in these organisations who know things and want the story out, and that to be a fair example of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think there are good people in every organisation. I write a lot of things that are critical about state organisations, but there's good people everywhere. But I mean, I think I wouldn't have gotten that under FOI.
No, you wouldn't.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I doubt it.
Because a lot of them have had problems with FOIs, they refuse and they've to apply.
Yeah, I mean, I could do another 2 hours on FOI.
I know you could,
and the problems with FOI and the difficulties with FOI. And in fact, I did talk to a class, journalism class, entirely about FOI. Trying to get one FOI over the line.
Yeah.
And that took me an hour, because it took about 9-10 months. And I have some very simple advice on FOI as well. But I mean, to me, that changed everything in terms of how we look at Tuam, because it's clear we did know. We knew about infant mortality, we knew about potential trafficking of children, we knew there was major concerns over money, and nothing was done. And I've kept making the point in pieces that I wrote, was that you can say all you want that we didn't know about it because Catherine Corliss told us, which she did in some regard. But I mean, I've always said if the word of Catherine Corliss was good enough for a state inquiry in 2014, why wasn't the word of the HSE, your own health authority, not enough for a state inquiry in 2012? And I think it's obvious because they wanted to kick that can down the road.
There wasn't a political will,
Yeah, there was no political will. And I mean, I subsequently got cabinet kind of observations from 2011 when they were even setting up the Magdalene inquiry, where they spoke about a concern that if we get granted redress to Magdalene women, there'd be further calls for redress into situations like mother and baby homes, foster care settings and psychiatric institutions. 2 years later, we had a state inquiry to mother and baby homes. We also have state inquiry to foster care arrangements. So I mean, you can see that there's an understanding at official level that all of these issues are linked. They're all one and the same issue, but the longer we can delay them, the better, because what it's all about is redress. So I mean, that's kind of one key aspect of changing the narrative, I suppose. I mean, I could go on forever about like material I have about Bessborough, you know, how they were over-reporting deaths and the numbers don't match, and I mean, there's a lot of, I'll be here all night. I'm trying to give maybe a snapshot of 2 or 3 kind of bigger stories that I've written on the subject and what it took to get them over the line. I mean, that's an example of a story that was actually really simple to get over the line. I mean, you got to document that. I mean, it's you know, sometimes you get documents that allude to things and you know what they're saying, but there isn't a great hook for, there isn't a great sexy page 1 story, whereas that has got everything you wanted in it. I mean, like the last 3 paragraphs, I mean, as you see, I asterisk them. I mean, there's your story. I mean, in 3 paragraphs.
It writes itself.
Absolutely, you know, I mean that document has done the rounds on social media now. It's always trotted out when people try to claim that the state didn't know about this stuff. I mean, that's the proof they did. I mean, the contrast to that then is a story I did on vaccine trials, which again is all related to do with in a lot of these institutions and mother and baby homes, one of the bigger issue, and it is under investigation by the current commission, is the use of children in these institutions for the trialling of vaccines by pharmaceutical companies, company, GlaxoSmithKline, former Burroughs Wellcome, which was subsumed into GlaxoSmithKline. Burroughs Wellcome was a British pharmaceutical giant, basically. And again, you know, why were they? The fact that they were carrying out vaccine trials on children in Ireland always seemed curious to me, as to why they were doing it in Ireland, not in Britain. So again, I got quite a big story on vaccine trials, and I'll maybe take you through in terms of this was a kind of a dynamite piece of evidence, but was a lot harder to stand up. And again, I think there's too often in kind of television reflections of the media, you know, I mean, I don't know, there was a terrible program about journalism, what was it called, The Newsroom or something, it was American. God, it was awful. But I mean, a lot of it was all like, you know, real hard-hitting, kind of fast-paced newsroom, and then I can't remember what it was. It was a major kind of international story that was happening at the time. I think it was, I can't remember what it was, but essentially they were trying to get reporters to get an answer to it, and someone just rings the newsroom, and this guy picks it up and goes, "Oh, I have a friend working wherever," and he rings him up, and the guy tells him the whole story. And I'm like, well,
Doesn't happen like that.
Never happens like that. You know what I mean? It requires work, and if it did, the job wouldn't be as rewarding as it can be. So I suppose in mother and baby homes, these institutions that are run by the religious, vaccine trial side of it is a big thing of mine as well. Probably the most difficult aspect to get information in regards to. And down through the years, you know, I've learned that they were, you know, like in December I wrote a big story about a woman who was instructed to sign a false name on a consent form, the name of a person who doesn't exist, and all of the paperwork was then set out in a false name and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of the story, that a lot of the issues that permeate through the entire story is falsification of records or the alteration of records. And in this example, people look at this story like it happened years ago, and the important thing about this story was that this was a contemporary aspect to it, which I think was important, and it relates to the changing of original documentation, which I'm not aware of anyone else who've got anything like this, but initially when I got the document I was like jumping out of my seat going, this is great, and then you kind of realise there's a lot of problems in terms of getting it over the line. So I suppose I'll kind of take you through sometimes what it takes to get something over the line and kind of how boring you need to be to do it. I don't know how to move this down.
Yeah, you just here, just go next slide.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so
Is that the one you want
yeah.
to read? Yeah.
So this is a document that I got really excited about, which I know doesn't look like much, but I mean the two top lines there are kind of important. So where is it? Yeah, 8802 checked the 20 files, and 9802 made the changes. So I mean, I got this in an FOI, and I still don't know why I got it in an FOI, but I think I got it because the person didn't really know what it was about, and it just was in a cache of files, and it slipped in.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, anytime you see things like made the changes and checked the files, you'd be interested. I pretty much knew from the start what I had here. So this is to do with the Bessborough Mother and Baby Home, which had a vaccine trial that was carried out there between. I'll just pull up the exact date so I know exactly when it was. Between December 1960 and November 1961, there was a vaccine trial carried out. I think the 3-in-1 vaccine was trialled on children in the Bessborough Mother and Baby Home. And it's one of the, I think, 5 that have been admitted that were very controversial, because the argument has been made that the vaccines were trialled on children without the consent of their mothers. So I knew that there's, like, how many files are, like, there's 20 files, that I knew there was 20 children involved, there's 20 files listed, so I'm pretty certain that this is to do with the alteration of those files. So you get this, think, great, I'll write the story tomorrow, but there's a number of problems. The editor would be going, well, how do we know for certain that these files are specifically the vaccine files that you're talking about? So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is, how do you know that, because I was arguing that the 8802 and 9802 were dates, so the 8th of August 2002 and the 9th of August 2002. How do you fit that with all of the other numbers that run down the side? So 9803, 9804, 9805, 9806, and so on. So that was problem number 2. And all of these things I had to figure out how to get around them. And the reason why 2002 is of particular interest is because the Ryan Commission, the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse, was briefly investigating vaccine trials way back in 2002. It was subsequently shut down after a Supreme Court case was taken by 2 of the academics involved in vaccine trials. It's now been reopened, and it's now part of the Mother and Baby Home Commission, which is doing its work at the moment. So 2002 then, I was like, this is interesting, because this is changes made to files in 2002, potentially when a state inquiry is examining this very issue. So, you know, I'm jumping up and down thinking this is a great story and an important story, but it took quite a while to make it solid, because obviously a lot of it's redacted. So, you know, number 4, Magdalene, is there, and then again, this is about bad redaction as well. So, I mean, what I knew all, once I saw number 4, Magdalene, I knew all the rest that's redacted underneath. See, number 5 is redacted, number 8, number 10 are names, they're house names. So any woman who went into a mother baby home was given a fake name, essentially, that she was known as in the home. So your name could be Mary Dundon, but you'd be known as Joan in the mother baby home. They call them house names, so you wouldn't know anyone else there.
Yeah.
So they didn't redact Magdalene because they thought it was a Magdalene woman, which it wasn't. It was just a house name. So I mean, that gave me one handy piece of clue. So I had to firm this up. So I had nothing to go on other than this piece of paper. So the first thing I did was I rang the, well, I'll get to that actually, because that's an interesting part of it, but there's a few ways to firm things up, and I say this to everyone, is keep everything you ever get, even if it isn't important at the time. Because it probably, well, if you do this kind of stuff, it probably will become important down the line. So I had no idea how to firm any of this up, and I was really annoyed because I said, this is a bloody good story. But you know, the reason your editors are there and your lawyers are there to stop you kind of making mistakes. So again, how do I firm up that these are changes made to vaccine trials? So I went back into my documentation. I rang a few people who would have known. The only woman I knew who was a confirmed child, who's now an adult, that was used in the vaccine trials was a woman called Mary Steed, who was adopted to America. So I rang Mary Steed and said, I have this piece of paper, it's kind of interesting. So Mary said, remember the data protection request I sent in years and years and years ago? She said, have a look at that because I think there might be something interesting in it. So I went back, I had this from Mary for 8 or 9 years probably. And this is what I had from Mary. This didn't come under FY, this is I had for donkeys. So she got this under data protection many years earlier. So there's a few interesting things to note. And this is about firming up information basically. So there's a date, right? Well, the first thing, requested by none. I'm obviously conscious that if certain people watch this, I don't want to say too much. Requested by Sister Sarah for solicitor re-vaccine. So this is a nun from the order is requesting this information for a solicitor on the subject of vaccines. So, I mean, why would the solicitor be engaging with these files for vaccines? It was obviously because of the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse. They were looking at this at the time. So number 19 on the doctor's list. So all mine are listed as numbers, so I was thinking that's pretty interesting. And this is the key one. Very bottom, made file 6/8/2002. So that's the 6th of the 8th, 2002. And the other line to note is, where is it? So she's number 19 on the doctor's list. So anyway, I'll show you how I put this together. So can I go back one as well?
Go back, yeah, just go back there.
Is it? Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's number 19. If you go to number 19, it says crossed out indoor reg as is crossed out in the book. Inserted Dublin after all counties. And if you go down to what Mary got in her data protection request many years later, where's all counties? Why can't I see it? I need it.
Down at the end, is it? No?
Second paragraph.
Yeah.
You can see that, yeah, after all counties you have Dublin. You have number 19, you have Philomena, so obviously you know that was her mother. Why can't I see where's the Dublin after all counties?
What one are you looking for? Dublin, all
Yeah.
counties, is it? I take all counties Dublin, it's the second one down, page 365. You see?
Oh yeah, so there you go, I've underlined it. Yeah.
Josephine Fitzpatrick.
So on the first document where the changes are made, you see they wrote crossed out something in the book, inserted Dublin after all counties. The document which was made on the 6th of the 8th, 2002 has Dublin written in after all counties. So 6th of the 8th, 2002, this file was created for a solicitor for something to do with vaccines. And the information that's on this piece of paper has Dublin after all counties. I know this is kind of sad, but this is kind of the job. And then you go back to the document I got many years later. 8th of the 8th, 2002, they pulled the original files, and on the 9th of the 8th, 2002, they made the changes. And what did they do on number 19? They've inserted Dublin after all counties. So what you have on the last piece, which is Mary's document, is the creation of a record for a solicitor. And then what they do after the fact is they go back and they insert these changes into the original documentation. That was my thesis. So what was put in, inserted Dublin after all counties, was put into the original files that they held, the original contemporaneous files. And the file that Mary got under data protection she was one of 20 files that was being created for a solicitor to provide for whatever the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse wanted to know. So that was my next port of call, is when exactly was the Commission of Inquiry into child abuse, when it did seek discovery of vaccine trial records, when did they do it? So that was my next thing to figure out, to see if these dates match up. So 6th of the 8th, they create a file about Mary Steed with Dublin after all counties. 8th of the 8th, they pull the original 20 files and they insert Dublin after all counties into that original record. And then I find, when did they seek discovery? So that's easily found. One of their interim reports. So the Sisters of Sacred Heart of Jesus and Mary, the 22nd of July 2002. So about 2 weeks before, all of these files were altered. So they sought discovery of the records on the 22nd of July 2002. On the 6th of the 8th, which is the 6th of the following month, they would create a record about Mary Steed's mother. And on the 8th of the 8th, they insert that information, because that's what it says, inserted Dublin after all counties, into the original documents. So there you have a 3-step process and a timeline as to how this happened. That was my argument. Now, I thought that, that's pretty watertight. The order disagreed, but there you go. So I mean, that took a lot of work to kind of put them together and see where it was in terms of dates. The other problem I ran into was, so I had 22nd of July, sought discovery, 6th of the 8th, they create a record for a solicitor to do with vaccine trials, and then on the 8th of the 8th, they pull the files and they make the changes in the original documentation. So I thought there's a handy timeline. And then the problem was pointed out, well, 8802, 9802, the first two top lines, how are you sure those are dates? Because the rest, 9803, 9804, 9805, don't obviously match that, because they're not 02. So I thought there's a problem. So what I did was, I figured that if this was done in 2002, and it's typed up on a Word document, I'll get a version of Word from then, and I'll type it up. So this is kind of what you do. So I typed up the exact 2 top lines I typed out. So I typed 8.802, check 25 delete, and then I hit return. And when you hit return, it defaults to 8803. So I figured I've nailed it, because the only way you can have the top 2 lines to appear as they appear there is if you type each individual letter and number in that exact manner. And then if you hit return after changes, you'll get 9803. So essentially, 9803, 9804, 9805 are defaults once they hit return. So I was satisfied. My argument was the top 2 lines, which are the 2 important lines, the only way they stay as they appear there is if someone physically typed them out that way. So they're dates. The rest aren't. The rest are someone hitting return after they finish a sentence. And I had to put that together as an argument as to why I think they're dates, along with the 3 other pieces of documentation, and that was enough to get the story over the line and write the story that basically the order was altering vaccine trial records 2 weeks after they were sought under discovery.
But that was the story, that this order,
yeah, it was on the front page.
Vaccine trial dates.
Yeah, so I said, the order that ran the Bessborough Mother and Baby Home altered vaccine trial records 2 weeks after the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse sought them under discovery.
Very good. And would they give you any comment on it, the order?
They just said they didn't, that none of the records were changed in the manner that I suggested.
So they denied it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But they didn't sue you for defamation?
I did get a legal correspondence from them on this story. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. But I mean, the document speaks for itself. I mean, it says directly that the information was altered. I mean, you go through the changed NM discharge, so that's changed natural mother's discharge from a date in 1960 to a date in 1962.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was particularly interesting. Like some of the changes, I don't know why they were done. Yeah. And I don't think it's up to me to figure. I mean, it's up to a commission to do it. But I mean, certainly the information about discharge. That particular one, number 17, so if you look at this was one I highlighted in the piece, if you change that natural mother's discharge date from 1960 to 1962, considering that the trial took place between December 1960 and 1961, that change had the effect of placing the woman in Bessborough at the time of the
trials,
which would mean which would indicate she gave consent, whereas the other date she was not there, so she couldn't have given consent. So I mean that's kind of a key change. Yeah, and I mean the document from day one I thought was a great story, but then you realise there's always problems that emerge in terms of how to stand things up and get them over the line. But I thought I had a strong enough, between the 3 dates, I thought I had a strong timeline, and that document speaks for itself. And even going so far as to get a word from the time and type it up. And now, maybe that's just me. And I'm kind of
but a lot of persistence. How long would it have taken you to put that story together?
I don't know.
A couple of months maybe, would it?
Yeah, probably, yeah, because I had to do I did an FOI, and I got a lot of good stuff in the FOI, but then you have like the battle is to get the FOI over the line, and going through the FOI I got lots of good stuff, and this just kind of popped out of it, and I was kind of going, what the hell is this? And then, once I saw the dates, like 66, I knew that the vaccine trial was there, I knew by the fact that there's 20, but like again, me knowing isn't enough to publish.
I know,
that's the problem.
You have to firm it up.
You have to firm things up, and you always have a wave of kind of excitement of something that's a strong story. But then the problems emerge, and you're like, well, how do you know it's that date, and how can we stand over that? And then you have to. But I mean, the value is I had Mary's deeds. Like I had that piece of documentation for years beforehand, and without that, I'd have never firmed it up.
And the fact you rang her and she
and that she said that some of it looked familiar to her.
But isn't that also the importance of keeping in contact with sources?
Absolutely, yeah.
And keeping their numbers, because you might do a story with someone like you did with her a couple of years, and then you suddenly clicked that.
Well, that's it. Like, I mean, that document I never wrote anything about. I just had it, I mean, because it wasn't a story on its own. But sometimes down the line, it became a key piece of documentation because I wouldn't have been able to stand the story up without it.
Without it, God, that's interesting.
So I mean, so while the first one was a lot easier and it changes the narrative and does all those fancy things, the second one was just as good a story, but like it required an awful lot more
of slog
to get it. But I mean, I think you should enjoy the slog. Like the slog is
but that keeps you going as well, doesn't it?
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
You have something.
Yeah. I mean, and it is just about being dogged on things like that. And I mean, I just knew it was a story, and no matter what, I was going to figure out a way to firm it up.
To write it,
I don't know how long it took. It probably did take a while to put it together. Even though it's only 3 pieces of paper,
I know.
But it's to link them all together.
And you see, while Conall would have been doing that, he'd have to be doing his other work as well, wouldn't you? So they might send you down to the court one day. You'd have to park that. And you wouldn't get 3 months to do all that.
No. And I learned the hard way. You don't pitch anything
until you're really sure. Oh no, don't, because they want it tomorrow.
They want it then, So I mean, I didn't pitch it, and I mean, I've lots of stuff. I mean, I'm working on something at the moment that I haven't pitched at all because I don't know how long it'll take. But I mean, I know it's true. But I mean, again, knowing and publishing are very different things,
And having evidence.
Yeah. And I'll just run through 2 other things very quickly. Again, and it's in terms of when you have a good feeling on a good story, stay writing about it, because most of the stuff I wrote about this was not a big story at the time, but subsequently it has become a big story. And then you can hold people to account with it, and you can make a difference. And when they announced these 126 files that had illegal registrations marked for them in St. Patrick's Gill, like the minister announced that in a press conference in Dublin. It was a big thing. And most of the media jumped on and said, this is the next big adoption scandal. This is the big adoption scandal we've all been waiting for, kind of thing. But of course, again, I kind of had written a lot about illegal birth registrations over the years, so I had a lot to go on. So, I mean, I just kind of did a few little bullet points about, again, this is about narrative, but it's also about, the more you write about something, it will eventually be useful to you, because the department is still saying this, that these are the only cases, these 126 that they discovered in May, in records held by TUSA, which now hold the St. Patrick's Gill records. This was the agency that Tress was involved with. They said they're the only cases in which clear evidence has been found. Now, Tressa Reeves' case, it's documented. They told her, the nuns actually told her this in writing. So, I mean, that's at least one. But I've written about more anyway. So these were found, it was announced, they said, we're going to do a scoping exercise now, we're going to look at a sample of records to see whether or not we need a full audit of adoption records. Now I've been asking, or not asking, who might ask, but I mean I've been writing about the need of a full adoption record audit for I don't know how many years. Years and years and years and years. And I was always told there's no point. That such an audit would yield, I know it off by heart, such an audit would yield little useful information, as there would be very limited information on files. But they found 126 that were actually marked for post-it notes for them when they actually bothered to look. So now they're doing an audit, even though they told me for years there's no point in an audit. So there's your kind of, this is again an exercise to control the narrative story.
Once you find 126 cases that are marked for you, you can't exactly ignore them. So again, yeah, it doesn't stand up. See, I had written all these other stories in the meantime, which I could then pull out of my back pocket when they were trying to say, we found all these cases, we better examine them now, it's a big story.
Is that DCYA? Is that the
Department of Children and Youth Affairs?
Youth Affairs, yeah.
So obviously, I was able to point to Tress's case in 2010 being documented. In fact, she had told three separate ministers about it. But on the back of Tress's case, the Adoption Board, the then Adoption Board, is now the Adoption Authority of Ireland, which is the regulatory body for adoptions in Ireland, had actually carried out an audit of its own records, and they had found 50 cases in 2011, which they had reported to the Department
of Children at the time, in 2011. I was writing these stories and they were like, 8 or 9 paragraphs, 10 paragraphs inside the newspaper. Got no pickup, no one cared, wasn't a big story at the time, but in 2018, it is a massive story. So this is the importance of, if you keep banging away at something, it becomes a story, and then you can go back. So I wrote a huge big piece saying, well, there's a little more to this than meets the eye. In 2013, again, this information I got under FOI, which I'd written about in 2015, I think. An Adoption Authority of Ireland, which is the same as the Adoption Board, it's the subsequent body of it. A delegation went to the Department of Children and Youth and said that there was at least 120 confirmed cases that they had of illegal registrations. They specifically name-checked St. Patrick's Guild at that meeting. So this is 5 years before the department stand up in a press conference and say, we found all these cases. They name St. Patrick's Guild as being aware of several hundred illegal registrations. So their own regulatory body is saying this is them 5 years earlier. And I had written about this at the time, but again, nobody cared about the issue at the time, so it wasn't a big story. And they go on and they speculated that there could be thousands of these cases out there. And the department are still trying to spin the story saying, well, this is the only high-level evidence that we've ever had that there's illegal registrations ever happened, which to me is just beyond bonkers. And then I go even further. I had a 2014 memo of a meeting between St. Patrick's Guild and Tusla where it stated that, and these are direct quotes, that the records had some illegal registrations. So these are the records that they found the evidence of in 2018. So in 2014 they were actually saying that they know they're there and that the full details of these cases are available on the majority of cases. Worth pointing out that the department routinely told me that an examination of records would yield little useful information because there isn't a lot of information on the files. Now there's two things. How could you possibly know if there's very little information on files if no one has ever looked at them? That's one kind of crazy logic. And the second is, they're actually saying that the full details are available. And then in 2015...
They're contradicting themselves.
And this is what you'll learn to kind of go mad about. And then in 2015, again, its own regulatory body for adoption, so I mean the experts in the field, sent 3 separate reports on illegal birth registrations to the department, again 3 years before the big announcement last year, including a spreadsheet of cases, 90 cases, where they actually give narratives of how they were done, etc., etc. And throughout all of this, the department was telling me that there's no point in doing an audit of records, not to see on the files. Because, of course, I was just one guy writing about it in the Examiner on page 6 or page 7, and it's not a big story. But then when they found them, and somebody in the department was said, we better make this public because you can't have it come out if they're discovered subsequently. They weren't aware that I'd been banging on this drum for a long time, so once the story breaks, I could go back and do like literally a Google search of everything I've ever written on them and go, hang on, yeah, here you go. Now the way they're spinning it is saying, well, what we found in the records were actual clear evidence, whereas what the Adoption Authority had were suspicions.
Oh, right.
And now they're going to look back on the adoption reports, and I was going, but would you not have thought it was wise to look back at them at the time? And surely the word of your own regulatory body for adoption, when they're actually saying we think this is an issue you should examine.
Yeah.
But anyway, but this is the madness that you have to
It's
deal
all
with.
spin doctoring, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is. I mean, but again, it's an attempt to shape a narrative. It's an attempt to say, we discovered these cases in 2018, and look at us now, aren't we great, we're doing something about it. Whereas in fact, I could go back, because I was writing about it all the time, saying, well, in fact, that's not the case.
Pick out the stories.
Yeah, and I think that's, while it's kind of, it's laughable when you read it like that, it's not when you're doing it right about it. That's the importance of having the confidence in what you do, I think, to kind of stay at something, even if people think there's nothing in it, and you don't get a lot of traction out of it, and you might only get like 10 or 11 bars in the newspaper, because you're up against everyone else in the newspaper, you're pitching a story. But if you think something is important, and I thought that this would be a big scandal, and I still do, and I still think there'll be a state inquiry into adoptions and illegal adoptions. I knew from the day, and I trace it all right back to Tressa, I knew from that day that this was an important thing to write about. And now it's become that, I suppose, but I mean, once they tried to shape this spin, I was able to go back and go, well, hang on, that's not the case. You were being told about this on numerous occasions.
Did they respond to that when you showed that they did know? Did they give any official response?
Yeah, they said, again, they said that, oh well, these reports were not clear evidence, these were suspicions. But the only reason they have evidence, why they're calling the 126 cases evidence, is because there was post-it notes on the records themselves which said adopted from birth, which is clear indication that they're dodgy. So I mean, as I pointed out, like, the tendency for all illegal acts is generally that you don't highlight them. That's what makes them kind of illegal. So I mean, to suggest that, if you're going to suggest that the only clear evidence we have of any illegal act is that someone actually knocks on your door and tells you it, I mean, well then, we'd never solve anything, you know what I mean?
Nothing is going to happen.
All illegal acts are hidden. Generally, that's kind of why you break the law, isn't it? You don't notify people.
That's right.
But anyway, I mean, I could do a hell of a lot more on legal registrations. But I suppose they're the kind of the three key things I hope that I tried to get across was that, if you start on something, even when you're young, which is I was very young when I started on this, stay at it. Like, trust your gut on something. Meet people, bring people, kind of, don't be afraid to have a go at something, even if it doesn't make waves or headlines or doesn't get you on the radio or the TV, because none of this did for me for years and years and years. But I had the confidence to go, this is important, and I think it will be important. Secondly, change the narrative. Like, you can do it. Don't always believe what you're told. And when you have a story, go deeper, you know what I mean? Don't be afraid to say, well, do I think that's the case, or is there anything else to this?
Does it stand up?
Yeah, I know it sounds simple, but a lot of the media tend to be, I think, and I put my, I'm part of it, so I suppose I'm not criticising anyone or any specific organisation, but a lot of the modern journalism grind is you're being spoon-fed information, and you have to question where you're getting that information. And this type of work is the exact opposite, because this is all information that they don't want you to have and people don't want you to have. And to me, that's what real journalism should be.
And it takes time.
Yeah, it does,
And the problem at the moment is, I'd say, in a lot of newsrooms with the whole online, there's a race to get it first.
Yeah.
And there's pressure being put on journalists just to rehash the old press release.
Well, I mean, I suppose, there's stories that, God knows if you're writing about Brexit, you're misfortunate enough to write about that. There is news that develops rapidly, but there's also stuff that's hidden, and that's where the role, I think, of investigative type stuff comes in. I mean, that's what I like to do and what I think I'm good at. I've never been a great daily, I mean, my news editor would probably confirm it. I'm never a guy to go in and pitch 5 and 6 stories a day, that's just not me. I'm not. But I do think when I come up with something, I'll have something good and something important.
Yeah, we have the track record of putting it together and
even if it's, you're not getting anywhere at the time, it does make a difference. I mean, I wrote a story about the Magdalene redress scheme that they excluded women that were in a training centre attached to the Magdalene Laundry, and I wrote that in 2015, and eventually the Ombudsman investigated the Magdalene redress scheme based on that story, largely on complaints from women who were in that training centre. But that was a key piece of evidence where I had a document where HSE said they had uncovered evidence that Ungreenon, which was the name of the training centre, and Hyde Park Laundry, which is the name of the laundry, were essentially one and the same thing, and that all of them, women in the girls at the time in the training centre, worked in the laundry. They were all excluded from the redress scheme, and now that redress scheme has been reopened. So I mean.
Yeah, well that's, I mean, you're
It took a while,
affecting change, and are they included in it now? Are they going to get money?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
very good. Yeah.
Now, there's still other issues.
Another
with it,
part, yeah.
But you know, I think good journalism. I mean, there's a lot of negativity around journalism at the.
But I think good journalism with passionate journalists can make a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, you just need to be patient.
Patient,
And
but
be
as
prepared
you
to
say,
wait it out for a long time.
if you do think it's an important matter of public interest and something is being pushed under the carpet or whatever, it motivates you to. Is that what motivates you? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I suppose I suppose I have a kind of a human rights kind of
Yeah.
bent, I suppose. And
Yeah.
when I met Tressa, I was kind of just struck by her as a person and what happened to her. And I suppose I quickly saw that this was a system and that it
Yeah.
affected potentially a lot of people. And I suppose that's the nature of any journalism. I suppose
Yeah.
you find something that grabs you and you chase it. And if you're like me and human rights is your thing,
Yeah.
and we don't have a great record of our treatment of women and children, I thought it was important to highlight it. And I suppose, like with the Me Too movement and I suppose issues around women's rights have become far more to the fore in the last 2 or 3 years than they would have when I started writing about this. Like no one gave a damn about this kind
Yeah.
of stuff at the time.
So there's obviously a huge follow-up story in it now, isn't there? With
Oh yeah,
the people who didn't know they were adopted being contacted.
well,
and now,
and
what's happening with all that?
Well, there's more to that than there's more on that. I mean, I'm still working on stuff around
Yeah.
that. But I mean, while they're looking, the interesting thing about the sample exercise, I suppose, I mean that's another example of delay. I mean, we already know there needs to be a full audit of the records. I mean,
Yeah.
why are you having a scoping exercise? The scoping exercise was announced in May. It was supposed to be completed in October. It's now not going to be completed till April, and I've heard it potentially will go on even longer. And that's just the scoping exercise to see whether or not we should have a full audit. So they found 126. I got information from TUSLA which said that they had concerns about another 748 cases, and that's just to do with one agency. We already know what happened across multiple agencies because A, I've been writing about it, and B, the Adoption Authority of Ireland have already told them over years that it was happening.
Yeah.
So why are we doing a scoping exercise? And then they won't actually tell you how many records they're actually examining in the sample or what methodology they're using.
Just to explain to them the scoping exercise.
So they're taking a sample of records and
but
seeing, is there a wider issue here that we should be examining? But sure, we already know that there is.
Yeah.
So
And if you were cynical, you'd say that's kind of a stalling exercise. Wouldn't you?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I would be
That's it,
straight up and not
basically, isn't
cynical
it?
about
Yeah.
it and say that's definitely what it is. Because I mean, scoping exercise is now going to take a year,
No.
and that's before we do a full audit.
Sure, they're probably hoping that people will forget about it. I know you won't, but like they'll
No,
go
I
away.
won't,
You know
no,
what I mean?
no.
But that's kind of, we're being
But that's
cynical.
kind of
but that's the way they work.
That's the way
isn't
it works,
Yeah.
and you, I suppose, when you have a backlog of stories that you've written, you can kind of call on them to kind of. A lot of what I do is, and I mean that's why I kind of name it the story that keeps on breaking, because Anne Enright wrote that in a piece because I'd spoken to her when she was preparing a thing, and she just said, you keep on breaking the same story, and that's kind of what it is. I mean, I don't know how many times I've written opinion pieces like 4,000 and 5,000 words where I'm saying the exact same thing that I said 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm trying to think of another way to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Because
The story hasn't gone away.
no,
Yeah.
it's just a variation on a theme,
Yeah. Yeah, very good.
So that's kind of, I hope
Yeah, that's
that
very
made
good.
sense, and there's some sort of lessons in there
Yeah.
for you. But I mean, maybe my 3 ones: trust your gut, don't believe what you're told, try and change the narrative, and
That's good advice. Trust your gut. Don't believe the narrative, and
my last one is kind of, have the confidence to know that it can actually make a difference. I know it sounds kind of trite
Yes,
to say it,
yeah.
kind of, but it is like, good journalism does actually matter, and is more important now than it ever
Yeah.
has been. And like, if you stick at something, it does actually get you somewhere,
yeah. Is that basically?
Yes,
I'd say
yeah.
Very good. Well,
I mean, I could keep going. But like,
No, I know. Thanks very much. Give us 3 minutes. Anyone want to ask any questions? Okay, sorry, what's your name?
Hi there, I'm Sylvia Murphy-Ty. I'm a midwifery lecturer and I'm delighted to come in here today.
How's it going?
Connected on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I've been reading all of your work for many years, and I just want to commend you on it. What struck me actually is you said you did a history degree, and I just, there's a lot of students in the room, so I think the rigour of your work stands far and above that of many others. So I wonder, have you anything to say about undertaking history and reading history, and is there a lesson in that? Maybe for policymakers who are looking at taking it away from our, juniors are not making it.
I spoke at a thing in Galway there last week with Catherine Corliss actually, and that came up a bit. I did a history degree and I did a history masters in Trinity, which I hated. I didn't mind the masters. I wasn't mad about Trinity, but I don't know. I mean, I suppose I enjoyed history and I liked the again the whole narrative side of things, and whether or not I often got the sense when I was doing history that what I was being told, is there another way of looking at this and examining it, and I suppose that's what I took from history, that as soon as I went into college, when I had professors tell me something, I was often wondering, did I buy it that way or did I see it the same way? So I suppose critical thinking, maybe, for certain, but I think one of the reasons why I potentially went into journalism, and one of the things that annoys me about this story actually is that it's always seen as a history thing, that this happened years ago, whereas in fact I hope that from what I said today is that in tandem with that there's a contemporary aspect to this, and that's essentially that there's a great fear of these issues amongst the state apparatus at the moment about how big it could be, and potentially how wide a story this is. So I mean, I always try to couch, say individual examples of what happened to for example, I wrote a story about a natural mother who signed a false consent form and all the rest. While that happened to her when she was a very young teenager, I also, part of that story was what TUSLA social workers were saying about her in 2017, which was essentially, don't refer to it as an illegal case. We have to keep our powder dry in case she takes a legal case. So I mean, you have one side of what the nuns did to this poor girl when she was a child, and then you have the state saying we need to be careful of these women because God, they could take legal cases. So the contemporary aspect to this is as important to me as the historic side, and I think sometimes that's a little bit lost in the discussion of the history side of it. But yeah, I do think my history degree did stand to me. I do think a little bit of it is just kind of personality. I'd be a terrible freelance journalist because a lot of the stuff I like to do is slow, really slow. So I found cases of children buried from the Vesper Mother and Baby Home in unmarked graves as late as 1990. That involves going up, walking around graves on Saturday mornings. That's kind of what I do. I'm kind of sad that way, and I don't, I just do that kind of off before I pitch it. So I suppose a little bit of obsession about a story is kind of part of it too. I am thoroughly obsessed by this stuff because I think it's important, but I'm driven that way. I if I'm interested in a subject, I read all the books about it, you know what I mean? I don't just kind of nip away at the sides. I'd like to read everything and then I move on to something else. But I suppose a mixture of both. But yeah, I think history taught me how to look at records, how to find records, how to critically assess them, and it probably also taught me that not everything is necessarily in an archive, you know what I mean? There's lots of information in people's lived experience, and I think that's as important rather than just what somebody said in an official document. That's probably a really long-winded answer to that.
Thanks very much.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Maxine?
You were kind of talking earlier about, kind of getting an FOI over the line. Do you have any more examples of how you might have done that, or where you've had difficulty in doing that?
Oh, yeah, loads.
What recommendations are
So I suppose read the legislation, and when you get a response refusing you on X, Y, or Z section, make sure you know exactly what they're refusing you on and challenge it. So I mean, there's a few key things I do. So once you submit it, be sure to ensure you get an acknowledgement and a date for when it's returned. If you don't get it on that date, this is what I do anyway. I seek an immediate internal review on the basis that it's been refused. because a lot of time they'll drag it along and say, oh yeah, we're looking into that, and will you wait another? I never do. I just immediately internally review it, because it'll then be pushed up to someone else, and you can be guaranteed there'll be an element of annoyance that it hasn't been dealt with. I learned this over the years, I don't do anything over the phone with FOI officers. I do everything in writing, because, you know, a phone record is no good to you if you're internally reviewing something, or if you're going to the information commissioner about something. Like the talk I gave on FOI, like I did go through, and I had like slides of the emails. Like I put in an FOI that took 12 months to get a response from, and it was refused, and the only reason I got it over the line was because I actually had such a degree of email correspondence with the decision maker that I actually had found them saying to me, well, we have the bulk of this work done, and they eventually refused me, saying that it would be too demanding a request on the FOI unit. And I said, well, funny how you were saying that in December, when in fact you told me in whatever date that you had the bulk of the work done. So I mean, it's important to have a record, and you just have to, like, you have to persist. Like I would be like emailing every day, and if it's late, I mean, I'm just dogged like that on FOI, because I think FOI is just routinely abused. And I mean, there's arguments. I mean, no doubt these FOI units are probably understaffed and under-resourced, but I mean, the worst thing you can do as a journalist is submit an FOI and then just kind of leave it on the, you know, hang out there, you know, and they get a call going, oh, we'll have that now a couple of weeks. I mean, if it's late, it's late, and if it's late within the time frame, internally review it. And if you don't get an answer internally review, go to the information commissioner. It only costs you, I don't know how much it is it 15 quid?
15
now,
euro,
you could be
yeah.
waiting a year for a decision from the information commissioner.
Yeah, but keep pushing.
You have to be like a dog with a bone on FOI,
Yeah.
and you have to know the legislation inside out, because oftentimes you'll get FOI officers that I find that refuse you on the grounds of whatever section of the Act, and they understand the Act so poorly that you can kind of take apart their argument fairly easily. But I personally think that, like, I'd love media organisations if you know, your FOIs were handled by legal people.
Yeah.
I think it's daft that journalists have to, when an FOI is refused on legal grounds and they have employed people to refuse it, that a journalist is kind of then expected to kind of understand the nuances of
the
FOI
legalities.
law to then appeal
Yeah.
it. I mean, that's
But
kind of personal.
that's the
thing,
way.
but that's the way of the world, I suppose. But
Yeah. But
yeah,
it's
like,
part of the stonewalling thing.
absolutely.
Isn't it?
I mean,
Yeah.
I had FOIs where I didn't even get an acknowledgement, that I was having to ring up people and go, can somebody just even acknowledge that you have it? Because without an acknowledgement and an FOI number, you can't even chase it. But that's the kind of thing. But you just have to stay on, you know.
Very good, Francis.
I was just about to point out the first document, well, all of them really. You know, I noticed that like none of them have like any stamps or like official like department thing on it. Like when you get those kind of things, do you ever question it and say, well, like this could be written by anyone, or do you kind of just trust it and say?
In general, like if I got it sent in the post randomly, no, because of how it's like, you'd want to go to a hell of a lot of work to kind of just type up a document stating that. For what benefit? I mean, the first one, it's dated, the specific dates you can track back to the actual investigations into the laundries. Also, I knew the source, so source was like absolutely watertight. I take your point, yeah. I mean, you know, if you get something sent randomly in the post, but I mean, I would argue that the vaccine stuff that I got, ultimately, that's what I had to do. I had to firm it up, which I did through the process I explained. But no, I mean, there are people named who were easy to check out who they were and where they were at the time. The date was pretty much on the money in terms of when they were looking into these specific issues. And again, like, you can generally see by the way it's written. I mean, if someone was to falsify that, I question why you would do it and send it to a reporter. I mean, there's not a lot you're going to gain out of it, particularly on a subject that wasn't...
And it was something that very few people knew about.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, and the names and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Anyone else?
But I mean, that's another thing of trusting your gut as well. Like, you know what I mean? You know, don't ignore the niggle. You know, if you're concerned on something and you're kind of going, I mean, that there's a reason for that, and then you just need to do more work to firm it up, basically.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Holly?
I know that with this topic, you describe it as an obsession, and it's been something that you've been working on for a long time. But what is kind of like the ideal end point for you? I know you say that you're going to keep writing about it, but if you had like a motivation, what is it that you want to continue uncovering, or like what's the goal?
That's a good question, actually. I don't know, be out of a job, I suppose.
Be out of a job.
I suppose, I mean, even I know there's a lot of talk about infant mortality. That was never my. Again, like what I said at the start, that I had no interest in women's rights. I do. Not that I had no interest in infant mortality, but adoption was the issue that I suppose I think is the elephant in the room in all of this, is that I think that the scale of forced and illegal adoption in Ireland and the impact that had on thousands of women, not to mention their children, I think that is the big scandal that runs through all this. So ideally I'd like to see that fully exposed, all of the adoption records opened and examined, a state apology, which I think is inevitable, and some sort of answer as to exactly how all of this was done and facilitated. So I suppose a fuller understanding of that system. But again, like, and a fuller, I suppose I'd like to get a fuller expose of how all these systems were interlinked and how these institutions worked in tandem with each other. The systemic nature of it, I suppose, is what interests me. But I suppose in terms of satisfaction, I suppose an apology and an acknowledgement for the women and what they went through and their children, and some basic legal rights for, I suppose, the adopted people who were affected by it. Because I mean, I could talk about that. I mean, they have so few. I mean, you've no legal right to your own birth certificate. You've no legal right to your medical information. There's very little information that they're actually entitled to, and I think that's wrong. But mainly an apology and an acknowledgement of what happened, and a kind of a fuller understanding of the issue.
Very good. Anyone else? Oh, I see we have some second years here. Very good, Christina. Good to see you. Anyone else? Yes.
I guess, how does it feel to be kind of one of the people that people go to when they want to talk about this? Like, I don't know if you want to be referred to as like a face to it all, but like kind of a go-to for, you said that you've been like called into interviews about it and you wrote opinion pieces. How does it feel personally to kind of?
I suppose it's part of the job in that sense, like that you might be on the TV or on the radio about it. To me, for so long I was writing about it, nobody really cared about it. So I suppose it's kind of kind of evolved from there. Like that, I'm asked to talk at things a bit more. But like I enjoy talking about it, so and I talk a lot. So I never really think of it that way. I'm not a big fan of like, you know, being the face of anything. I'm not really either. I suppose I just bite into the fact that I've written about it for so long, that when it became a big story, gradually my stuff retrospectively started to get a bit more noticed, and people started to go, Jesus, you know, you've been writing about this a long time, you know, and that's kind of how it happened, you know, like whether it was TV or radio or people just looking for information, or people doing documentaries now. I get a lot of people ringing me going, God, like you've been banging on this film for a while. I don't think of it like, I suppose I enjoy doing the work. I don't want to be the face of anything. Like I'm not a campaigner, you know what I mean? I'm not. You know, I have my I have my opinions on the issue, but I like to think my work is strictly journalistic and factual, and I suppose it deepens or opens up a bit more understanding of what happened and how it occurred. But yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I suppose I'm not Catherine Corliss, like she's on the Late Late and all the rest and that kind of thing. So she's really the face of it. I suppose I'm just the journalist that writes a lot about it for a long time.
But you probably get great satisfaction out of, because it is a human rights issue at the end of the day, in exposing it and
yeah, like
trying
I
to
suppose
see
if
something
something
about
comes of it, yeah, like
Yeah.
I mean when the Magdalene scheme was reopened, the redress scheme, like I took a lot of satisfaction from that because you know, I dealt with a lot of the women impacted by it, and you know, the fact that you get a piece of paper that says something that becomes kind of an important kind of cog in kind of getting the ombudsman to investigate something, and then you know, essentially demanding that the scheme be reopened. Like I get satisfaction from that kind of thing, knowing that the work makes a difference. Like I don't really care about being on the radio or the TV, but I do like to think that something that you've written has changed the game, so even in a small way. You know, and I get a big satisfaction, like when Tressa settled her case last year. Like I took a huge amount of satisfaction out of that because you know, she was the very first person that I wrote about in this story, and I know her, you know, a long time, and I know what she's been through, and I know the courage it took to take on the state and to take on a religious order. And you know, when she finally got, you know, a settlement in that, I took great pride in that. Yeah, that I did my part, and I kind of was a person who helped in that journey. That kind of thing, I do get a bit of satisfaction out of, but all the rest of it.
Very good. Yes, Christine?
Because it's something you're so passionate about, do you ever struggle to stay unbiased in your writing and research? Like, do you ever want to connect the dots so badly that maybe you're so wrapped up in it that you...
Yeah, it's a good question, yeah. I suppose, yeah, like I'm always aware of it. You know, and like if I was to, you know, I'd like to think I'm honest enough to know that if everything I had was... there was a piece of paper that told me everything I'd written was wrong, I'd have the balls to say that and write about it. But so far, the track I've been on seems to be the right one. And even, you know, a lot of the things that I maybe have alluded to, I would have, like, I would know probably a lot more than what I write about, and I would have certainly been, you know, information that I know I'm on the right track, whether or not I've proved it or not. But I would know from people who would know, who would say, keep going, you're sniffing around in the right area, that kind of thing. So, and I mean, look, I report what I have is all documented, and that's the way I try to do it, you know. I do write opinion pieces and stuff, you know, when something big happens or whatever. And I mean, I suppose I again, even writing that, I try to base them on, you know, I try to say like that, what I've said recently is that, you know, adoption is the next big thing that's going to break, and lo and behold, here we are. But again, I try to back all them in terms of documented stories that I've written. So I'd say, you know, well, I wrote X, Y, and Z, and that points to the potential for this being a big story. And, you know, like anything hard and fast that I say, I like to think I've backed up.
With facts, yeah.
With facts,
evidence,
like, I mean,
yeah.
the scale of illegal registrations, I don't know. I mean, but I say maybe thousands, because the Adoption Authority of Ireland have said that maybe thousands. Whether or not it is thousands, I suspect it potentially will be. But I mean, I don't make that claim anywhere unless I have it on a document that has speculated it, or someone in a position of authority has speculated it.
Very good.
But I think it is a trap that you can fall into, and certainly with my type of personality, when, you know, it's often, it can be hard to see the wood from the trees and stuff. But it's not like you get mountains of stuff either, that, you know, like a lot of this stuff takes an awful long time to get. And I suppose that tells you something as well, in that, you know, if it was all wrong, I'd imagine I'd be directed to that evidence a lot quicker than I have been.
Very good. Anyone else? Okay, yes?
I could imagine that you've come across a lot of classified documents. Do you just weigh pros and cons, thinking that people just need to know without thinking about the consequence it can have for you? Like, I know you could go to, I don't know, the court, and they will force you to give up your sources, and in the end maybe go to jail. Like, it can have a real consequence for you.
I don't know, I've never really thought about it. I mean, I suppose I'm not doing it, there's nothing in it that's national security or anything. So in general I haven't come across that kind of problem. I'd probably argue that the cohort of people that I write about, not many people in authority give much of a damn about for a long time. So I suppose I'm not going to, there's nothing too classified. I mean, a lot of the stuff I had would have been not meant for my eyes or whatever. But
It wasn't classified, it was
no,
just...
no,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it was obviously material that they weren't glad was in the public domain. But I mean, I've never had anything where I thought it would be dangerous to publish it or anything like that. And I suppose, look, if you do have material that would be, I mean, that would be a conversation you'd have with an editor or a news editor or whatever. But I mean, I suppose I'd have issues like I would have, like, I suppose I would have come across people's personal data or whatever in the course of the work. Individuals who've been affected that don't know that I would know. But I mean, I take those. I take that responsibility pretty seriously. Like, I wouldn't publish anyone's name or anyone's personal information, because to me, again, the individual isn't really the important thing. It's the, you know, if it's, you know, Mary Murphy's records or whatever, and I have Mary Murphy's name, it's the ABC of what happened to her, or the
abuse,
if it's an illegal act, or it's the
illegal,
paper trail. It's what it says about a wider system that I would write about, rather than someone's individual details, not without their permission. You know. If I had
Very
their
good.
permission, I would.
Anyone else? A final question? Well, listen, last year the group here said that they found Conall's talk one of the most inspiring because of your passion, obviously, for the story and your determination to stay at it. And I do admire you myself, having worked in the industry myself. It's very hard when you're in a newsroom where they want you to do all these other stories to keep to your own topic that you want to investigate. But I think if the one message you get from Conall, that it's important to keep at that, to keep investigating what you're interested in, and because that's the whole point of journalism, really. Because we're a vehicle, we investigate things that are a matter of public interest, in this case human rights. So listen, I'd like to thank you very much for coming up and taking the time to talk to us.